Hello, and welcome everyone to another episode of Rock the Cradle, our second with Dr. Mohammad Marandi of the University of Tehran, who is pretty much a one-man show busting through US and Israeli narratives on this region. Mohammed, I can't thank you enough for joining us here. I'm sure you're super busy.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay. Mohammed, can you start off by telling us what the scenes are like in Tehran, where I imagine you're based right now? We were hearing about a lot of um, indiscriminate bombings of civilian areas and civilian infrastructure, including the Azadi Sports Stadium today. What are the scenes like?
Yes, they are bombing civilian targets. They've been doing that from day one. Uh, they bombed hospitals. They bombed schools in Tehran. They've bombed stadiums. The Azadi Stadium is an Olympic class stadium. They've bombed squares where cars drive through and there's traffic. They do double uh, what do you call it?
Double tap attack.
Double tap attacks
Yeah,
in different areas in Tehran. One of my friends was witness to one of those attacks. He was in Ferdowsi Square,
yeah.
and they bombed the building, brought it down. He and others, or he witnessed others uh, helping as they were helping. I don't know exactly where he was, but he saw the second strike on that building. In other words,
Wow.
the Americans were targeting the first responders. They were targeting the rescuers. They were targeting the neighbors and the relatives who were trying to save the men, women, and children who were under the rubble. So, and this has been going on across the city. A reporter who works, I think, for Drop Site News. He sometimes contacts me. He told me that he has spoken to victims of double tap attacks and witnesses of such attacks himself too. So this is widespread, and if obviously it's happening outside of Tehran too. So there is a lot of innocent people being slaughtered, and of course the Western media is completely indifferent. It doesn't matter if it's CNN or Fox News or the BBC or the Guardian or the Times; they're all the same. And we saw that on day one when they slaughtered 168 girls at their elementary school in Minab City, and there was complete indifference from the very beginning. And of course, this is to be expected from this Epstein regime and the Israeli regime because that's what they do to girls.
It's ironic because in 2023, they were screaming about women's rights in Iran and the hijab issue. And then just as recently as January, they were screaming about the need to protect Iranian civilians. And on day one, day two, three, four, five, that's all they're targeting. Um, I also understand that every night there are demonstrations, or not demonstrations, rallies in Iranian cities against the Israelis and the US. What does that look like?
Well, that's another very interesting thing about MSNBC and the BBC and Sky News and France 24 and all these other outlets and The Guardian, that they hide these facts that people across the country, in huge numbers, in the tens of millions and millions in Tehran, they go to the streets at night and defend the armed forces, they defend the state, they commemorate Ayatollah Khamenei, they chant anti Trump and anti-Israeli slogans, and the crowds are just stunning. In Tehran, they don't gather in one place. There are like 20 or so different places, and in each of them there are tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. So millions are on the streets of Tehran and other cities, but what every night. And what is most extraordinary is that they do it under missile fire. And while they're uh, standing and protesting. The Americans and the Israelis bombed the cities, Tehran included, but also all these other cities, and people don't budge. And I posted some of this on my Telegram channel for the first 2 nights. I haven't had time to do subsequent nights. But if people go to my Telegram channel, they can see people protesting in massive numbers, and missiles incoming, and anti-aircraft or anti-missile systems working, but people don't budge. They stand their ground, men and women. It's quite stunning. I've never seen such a thing before in my life. But again, this is all censored by Western media because it does not fit the narrative. Because the truth is, from the very beginning, that the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had popular legitimacy. The truth is that the West never cared about women nor about anyone else. This is an Epstein class empire, and we've seen what they do to women and children. We see how no one is arrested, how all the key files are hidden, and the others are redacted. So these regimes have, and especially the U.S. regime, has no credibility at all. And people have awoken. Even some of those young people who took part in the riots
Yeah.
alongside these murderers and who were caught up in the excitement, these murderers who were shooting and killing police officers and who were burning uh, nurses alive and all that. These young people who are caught up in this, a lot of them have changed. Three students at my faculty, one who I know, the other two, they're in any case, they contacted me, and two of them actually were very emotional, and they were saying, "What can we do to effectively make up for what we've done? And how can we help? Because they thought maybe I had some connections, and I just encouraged them to go to uh, local authorities and see if they can help with different things. But the point is that these young people, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, that age group, which has been influenced by this Persian media empire that the West has, because they spend billions of dollars a year on Persian media. They have thousands of people working as trolls. They have many hundreds of television channels that they fund. They have websites, Telegram channels. Tens of thousands of so-called Iranian expats are on the payroll of Western regimes, and the United States and the Britain, of course, and the Germans and the French are at the forefront of this, and of course the Israeli regime. But a lot of these young kids were influenced by the disinformation constantly being spread. But when they saw how little children were being slaughtered, how hospitals were being targeted, the the IVF department in the Gandhi Hospital, which is a private hospital in Tehran. It's not even government owned, even though it doesn't make a difference, but it's a privately owned hospital.
Yeah.
The name, of course, is ironic too, but they targeted the IVF clinic. And so a lot of women who want to have children will no longer be able to have them. They destroyed the infant ward. And the hospital has been emptied. And they've been targeting many hospitals across the country and multiple hospitals in Tehran. And I posted some footage yesterday of carpet bombing in Tehran, where they just wiped out a neighborhood in a very crowded part of the city. It was a tweet that I posted it twice actually. Because it was so important for me, so that people would see this. But again, these are not things that you're going to see in Western media because they are all captured by the Epstein class. They're owned by the Epstein class, just like the states are owned by the Epstein class. So they're providing people with the sort of information that the Trump regime wants them to see, the Netanyahu regime wants them to see. But if they check up, if they look at alternative media, I'm sure they'll be able to find the an extraordinary large amount of atrocities that have been documented.
We'll make sure to link to your Telegram channel, so please keep posting, especially if it's in English, because there are Iranian channels, and I think a lot of our viewers speak English, and it'd be really good to direct them to places where we're seeing this, because we're only seeing sporadic things, the Gandhi Hospital, the stadium, the Azadi Square, etc. Again, ironic because of the whole women angle.
And right now we had explosions. So somewhere in Tehran right now, women and children have been massacred
I mean,
as we
Tehran's
speak.
a really big sprawling city. Are you hearing every day bangs? I mean, is it?
Yes, sometimes rolling uh, explosions. You just hear it for. Can you hear the explosions?
No, we can't hear.
There are just right now, multiple explosions right after one after another.
My goodness. And for anyone who
Listen,
doesn't know,
listen, listen. It's pretty close. Anyway.
Tehran is a sprawling, massive metropolis of around 14 million people. And I mean, I just can't imagine what the situation must feel like there. I mean, this is something Iranians haven't seen since the Iran-Iraq War, which was itself horrible and lasted 8 years. Mohammed, back to the women issue. I am hearing, I don't know if you can confirm this, but we're hearing things that Iranian women, I don't know if this is from polls or anecdotally, that Iranian women are gunning for a war against, the war against the US and Israel even more than Iranian men. That is certainly not something that fits into a Western narrative.
Well, I don't. I think I saw some poll. I don't
Yeah.
remember who took it and whether it's real or not. I don't. I vaguely recall seeing something 3 4 days ago
Yeah.
at near the beginning of the war, so I can't comment on that. But it's clear as day where
Mm.
people stand. And the West, they've been lying for 47 years, and they continue to lie. In fact, I have this weekly monologue on Al Mayadeen television, which in the program's in English. It's called Demystifying Iran. This week I won't be doing it because of the situation. They are having special programs. But last week on Friday, people can go and watch it. I did a program on the never ending, I don't recall what the title was exactly, but the never ending imminent collapse of Iran. And I showed how from the 1980s, the narrative on Iran has always been the same. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and others. In the 1990s, they were saying the revolution is about to collapse. People are
Mm.
dissatisfied. They hate the regime. The youth who did not experience the revolution want something else. Another revolution is brewing. You could remove all those sentences and phrases and paragraphs, and more explosions. They're hitting really hard right now. You could remove the 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 whole you know uh,
The modern,
text of the article, the whole text of the article, and print it today,
yeah,
and just remove a few words, and it will sound the same. You wouldn't notice the difference. So, since the 1980s and 90s and the beginning of this century, they've been saying the same thing, that
yeah,
the regime is about to fall, because that's the narrative. That's the fake narrative that they need. That, the Israelis, the Zionists, in order to convince Americans to be hostile towards Iran, they're uh, they're Persian-speaking mercenaries who, as I said, well over 10,000, maybe over 20,000. who are on their payroll, and of course their immediate families and so on. That's a lot of people. They've been paying these people for decades, so they will tell them what they need to hear. They get their funding, and then when they get the funding, they pay the politicians some of that funding to come and give speeches, and they just repeat the narrative, reinforce the narrative, and it's been going on for 47 years. But it always fails. Yet they don't learn from their failure because the narrative is just too powerful. And of course, there are vested interests in preserving that narrative. So during the 12-day war, when Iran was negotiating with the United States back then too, and the United States deceived Iran as they tried to do this time as well, the belief was that there's going to be some sort of that Iran is a house of cards and there's going to be some sort of collapse. Nothing happened. Exactly as we predicted, the Iranians were going to fight back and defeat them. And this time round, exactly as we expected, the Iranians, even though they martyred Ayatollah Khamenei, and just the Iranians immediately started hitting back, and they've been doing so from less than an hour after the launch of this unprovoked war. But just something I want to spend a couple of minutes on Ayatollah Khamenei. Ayatollah Khamenei stayed in his house and his office because he said vulnerable Iranians can't leave their homes, so I'm not leaving either. And of course, I'm sure everyone begged him to go to some underground place, or some other complex or some other building or some other city, but he was there the whole time. And that shows what sort of person he is and how he feels about the underclass and this disenfranchised and those who have nowhere to go. He was a person who went to jail during the Shah's time on multiple occasions, was tortured. And after the revolution, he was the youngest of the Revolutionary Council. As soon as the war began, he left Tehran and went to fight as a volunteer, even though he had no military experience. He learned while fighting. Then he was assassinated, and he was badly wounded, and he lost the ability to use his right arm, which he was right-handed. He had fantastic handwriting, beautiful handwriting, and at that age, after being assassinated, he learned to write with his left hand pretty well. He's a poet, and so he's very cultured. He speaks 4 languages. He's fluent. His Persian is fantastic. His knowledge of Persian literature is stunning. His Arabic, his Azeri, he's Azeri. The Khamenei is a city in Iranian Azerbaijan. He's very knowledgeable in English. He would read articles in English. He's read novels in English. That I have personal knowledge of. I recall one of the novels that he was either his favorite or one of his favorite that he read in English, although it's a French novel, is The Miserables or Les Miserables, Victor Hugo, which I think says a lot about his personality as well. He was always pushing different administrations to take care of the underclass, the disenfranchised, and that, of course, is very much a part of the ideology, Islam, and of course, in particular, Shia Islam, which has a very strong element of social justice in it and supporting the oppressed and standing up against the oppressor. And that's why he supported the Palestinians, the resistance in Southern Africa, in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, and elsewhere. And of course, he has been demonized for decades, both by Western media and also the oil and gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, which are all proxies of the United States, whether it's Qatar with its huge media empire, and it's not just Al Jazeera, and its funding of Salafi and Wahhabi extremists and takfiris, or the Emirates and the Saudis and the others. For decades, they've been trying to use disinformation and slander to to create division. But after his martyrdom, and after everyone especially over the past 2.5 years, or at least since October the 7th, uh, over 2 years ago, people have seen that the only entity that's sincere about the Palestinian cause is the axis of resistance in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Individuals, of course, there are billions probably now, but when it comes to states and major organizations, it is the axis of resistance and no one else. And he was the person who created this axis, and he was the person who created Iran's defensive and offensive capabilities that today are withstanding a war that is not just the United States and the Israeli regime, it is the entire West that is standing behind the United States, and it is its regional proxies, all of the family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf and the Caucasus, and Turkey as well. The United States is using AWACS jets, NATO, to gather intelligence from Iran. Their bases in Turkey are gathering intelligence on helping the Israelis offensively and defensively, and the Americans too. So Iran is fighting against all of this enormous coalition of evil, and it's holding its ground.
I couldn't agree with you more. Just another thing I learned in 2012 when I went to do interviews on how Iran was, uh, you know, faring despite sanctions. Wherever I went, nuclear medicine centers at hospitals, nanotechnology associations.
They bombed the nuclear hospital in Bushehr, I
Yeah,
think yesterday. Yeah, yesterday they bombed the nuclear hospital. So so a lot of cancer patients from now on
yeah.
in that part of the country are going to die.
Just for our viewers to know, nuclear medicine hospital has nothing to do with the weapons program. I mean, what basically I learned is that the West was banning the sale of even chemotherapy drugs to Iran, and certainly the diagnostic materials that you inject in for scans. And Iran's indigenous nuclear program is what made it possible for cancer patients to be treated and others with ailments. But Khamenei was so much more than even what you named in terms of how I discovered he had spearheaded technology and science in Iran, making Iran among the top 3 countries in the world to create annually scientific output. Um, I have to say, despite how the Americans have had control over the narratives, we have seen those fray like crazy. I mean, starting with the Gaza genocide, certainly in the June war, when they, very bad faith bombing of Iran despite negotiations ongoing, and again doing it today. But when Ali Khamenei was martyred, instead of those sort of whoops that you hear from the West with these kind of things, especially since he'd been maligned so much, um, I actually saw a lot of people saying they killed an 86-year-old man who stayed in his house. Many people watched the short speeches being, translated in English, where he said, "I get my dignity from my Iranian people." Things like that, and the fact that they killed his family members and his young granddaughter at the same time. I think the narratives have shifted, and this is important because we have never seen, I'm sure you nor I in our adult lives, Mohammed, the Americans not scene set for a military aggression overseas, scene set with their domestic population, right? And yet Trump entered this war with around 30% support by the American people of this war. And that narrative was not set. Americans are turning on his actions. Members of Congress are, notable Republicans are. Of course, not the Western media, because they seem to be the last, place 100%.
Because
That's
the Western media, whether on the so-called left, or the so-called right, or the liberals, they're all the same. They
yeah,
belong to this Epstein
yeah,
class, to these oligarchs. It doesn't matter if it's the Guardian or the Independent or the Times in London. It doesn't matter if it's Breitbart or the Washington Post or the New York Times in the United States or MSNBC or Fox News. It doesn't matter. They're
Mm.
all owned by the same class. When Trump spoke in his State of the Union address at the beginning of the war, or a few days ago, everyone gave him a standing ovation when he antagonized Iran. That was the only time when all of the SEALs were clapping simultaneously.
Mohammed, let me, before we go further into some analysis, which I really want you to bring to our viewers, I just want you to set the record straight on the fog of war that we're hearing outside. Um, Kurdish factions penetrating Iran, militarized factions armed by the Americans, Israelis, and others, hasn't happened yet.
No, and if they try, they'll be crushed. The
Yeah.
Iranians, the Erbil regime, Barzani, if he attempts to do anything or allows these terrorists and murderers who are mercenaries of the CIA to strike Iran, Iran will destroy his government. And the Iraqi resistance too will destroy his government. And that will be the end of this Erbil semi-autonomous territory. That'll be over. So if he wants to stay relevant, then he had better be careful about his behavior and he better be careful about our borders.
One thing that surprised us all is the Iraqi resistance from day one, also striking U.S. military targets inside Iraq and diplomatic, etc., inside Iraq and even in the Gulf countries. It's not something we have been used to seeing. Do you think Turkey will step in and inform the Iranians, as they allegedly did in January when Turkish militants were trying to cross that border?
No, they didn't give Iran any extraordinary intelligence on January. That was just a Turkish media uh, fabrication. Iran has all sorts of intelligence inside Iraq. No country, no foreign country has more intelligence from inside Iraq than Iran does because Iraq is full of Iran's allies. Remember, in the recent elections, despite the fact that the Western coalition, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Americans themselves, they were all heavily funding different parties and trying to influence the election results. Iran's allies won the election, and they won it big. The, their majority was far larger than last time, especially when you include the fact that this time, last time, their allies were increased after Muqtada Sadar's people quit parliament. So Iran has many allies in Iraq, and therefore they know exactly what's going on from north to south because the Iraqi people and the Iranian people have excellent relations. So this is something that the Barzani regime should be very concerned about because it will bring his reign to an end permanently if he is not careful.
And
Turkey, the Turkish people are fantastic people. I've been to Turkey multiple times, many times. I don't know exactly how many times I've been there, but they're pro-Palestine, they're anti-imperialist. But Erdogan he's in the American camp, and the AK party is a huge disappointment. They have nothing to do with resistance. They have nothing to do with Palestine. They use the name of Palestine just to get popularity, and they've never done anything for the resistance, and they've only attempted to harm the resistance. And as I said, in the confrontation between the Israelis and the Iranians, and the Americans and the Iranians, by continuing to transport cheap oil from Baku to Netanyahu, and by allowing the United States to use their airspace and to use military bases in their country against Iran, the regime is definitely not on our side.
yeah, Iraqi Kurdistan has been taking some of the biggest hits in Iraq, in Erbil, U.S. military bases, and we hear Mossad hubs. Um, I do want to get another fact check on you every
One
single
thing that
day.
I want people to know, because I've spent a lot of time in Kurdish areas. Kurds are very dignified people, and
Mm,
people should not assume that since these political parties are so corrupt, because all of the key Kurdish political parties that were in Syria or in Iraq, or those terrorists that are supposedly from Iran that are based in Iraq, they don't represent the people. Kurdish areas are not free. I have Kurdish students at the university at my university. I have students that are Kurdish that have been in my classes, and they say that we're under enormous pressure
mm,
by the mafia that rules over these Kurdish territories, but they can't do any much about it because it's the Americans and the CIA and Western intelligence agencies that are standing behind this mafia.
yeah. Let me just another fact check on the Assembly of Experts and the election of the or selection of the next supreme leader. We have been hearing, I mean, well before this war, that Khamenei's son will be the successor, and every day people are declaring, yes, he's been elected the successor. The last I heard last night was that, in fact, the Assembly of Experts, who is doing this vote remotely because of the threat of the from the enemy, has narrowed it down to some main candidates. Can you tell us anything more about that, or just nip this in the bud about Khamenei's son, which who could potentially be a main candidate too?
Ayatollah Khamenei has, during his period, no one had ever been introduced as his successor. And we have a constitution that is very clear
Yeah.
about how a leader is chosen. When a leader passes away or is removed from power by the Council of Experts, you have a period of time where there's three people run the country: the president, a council runs the country, the president, the head of the judiciary, and a representative from the Guardian Council, which is what we have right now.
Mhm.
Then, when the Council of Experts, which is an elected body every 8 years, when they choose another leader, that person he will have the authority of Ayatollah Khamenei. He will be the Wali Faqih, the leader of the Islamic Revolution. And so, right now, they are, from what we hear, they have chosen or spoken of a number of people who have the highest qualifications, and they're deciding which one they want as leader. Now, because of the circumstances, uh, they they don't, and for security reasons, they don't give out too much information about the situation, which is understandable. But one thing that I should say about Ayatollah Khamenei is that he had a very simple life, and his home was very simple, and footage of it
Mhm.
has now been shown because there's no longer a security issue. And his family all have um, simple lifestyles. They don't have any businesses. None of his children or their husbands and wives, none of them have businesses, and they too live simple lives. They're either academics or they're religious scholars, and uh, and all of them have been very low profile. So you don't see them on Iranian television. I've never seen any of his children on Iranian television, unless it was in one of his public appearances where uh, crowds come to the Hosseinia, and then the camera is rolling, and there are all sorts of people, and you see one of his
Mhm.
relatives sitting there by chance, but they're not introduced, or uh, they're not publicized. So he is unique among all world leaders
Mhm.
in his simple lifestyle. He's an intellectual. Anyone who knows Persian and hears him speak knows how sophisticated he is, how knowledgeable he is about history. He once gave a speech on the French Revolution, and it was stunning, the depth of his knowledge. So, this is a towering person, but he has been very careful to make sure his family is like himself, something which we don't see in the world anywhere else in the world, as far as I know. And but I do not know who is going to be the new leader. But whoever is the new leader will have the full support of society, because that is obviously what Ayatollah Khamenei would have wanted, and the armed forces and the state, and we will have continuity.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite remarkable you saying this part. You reminded me, I mean, when you contrast with the Trump family and how they seem to make out for any foreign or domestic policy situation that the White House approves, it's quite extraordinary. It's not just the Trump family, it's his, you know, kids-in-laws and whatnot. So yeah, I would agree with you there. Another fact check: Iran has denied they fired a missile towards Turkey yesterday. They have rejected any notion that they are hitting oil and gas energy facilities in the Persian Gulf countries. They have suggested that
What
other
they have
actors.
attacked, what they have attacked though is, I guess 15 or 16 tankers so far, and most of those tankers were trying to leave the Persian Gulf without permission, and they've been destroying facilities, port facilities, and oil and gas facilities that are linked to the US military, to Western and NATO military regimes. So, and they've been targeting other places where the American armed forces are present. So, if the American armed forces were hiding in civilian ports, which they did
Mhm.
with the consent of the governments, the Iranians struck.
Yeah.
If they hide their forces in hotels, which they do, the Iranians strike those hotels. So it's not just the military bases. Anything that constitutes U.S. That can be described as a U.S. asset or affiliated to the United States is going to be targeted.
But
But the
what's
Iranians do not target assets that are specifically owned by the state, even though all of these regimes are complicit in war. They all host US bases. All those US bases have been used against Iran for years and are being used as we speak. So they are a part of this war. They can't have their cake and eat it too. They can't allow the Americans to bomb us and to facilitate those bombings and to have installations to help those missile strikes and then say we're neutral. No, that's not possible. And we saw, for example, I mean, just a very simple example, the other day when 3 American jets were downed by the Iranians. Americans say that they were friendly fire, which I think is even was a foolish thing to say, because if it's friendly fire, then it just shows how awful American weapon systems are. But when those 3 jets were down, they fell very close to the Iranian border, but they fell over Kuwait. And
Yeah.
that means that the Kuwaitis are allowing the Americans to fly over their territory. And the same is true with Saudi Arabia. And of course, US jets are in Saudi air bases and in Jordanian air bases. So all of these regimes are playing a part in the war against the Iranian people.
What's notable in this case is, instead of having Iran have to insist over and over again, publicly and privately, that we are not targeting your oil and gas infrastructure in the Persian Gulf, um, it's the Arabs, many prominent Arabs in the Persian Gulf, who have been coming out almost from the onset of these attacks and saying there may be third parties involved who want us to
Well,
want to
that's
draw.
what Tucker Carlson has said. Yeah, that's what Tucker Carlson just said a couple of days ago. And he, of course, is very well connected to the highest ranking military and political officials in the United States. I don't think there's a journalist in the world that has more access than he does to the inside mechanisms and politicians and the military in the United States. So he went and said that the Saudis and the Qataris have arrested Mossad agents who are trying to uh, explode bombs to blow up facilities and installations in these two countries. So obviously, based on his knowledge and information, there is a third party that is involved in all this.
But perception is 100% of politics. And what's extraordinary is that we're hearing this from prominent Arabs in the Persian Gulf. And on the Cradle's live podcast later today, we're going to air an interview with a very, very critical of Iran Saudi editor on a Saudi channel, saying they're trying to bring us into this war. And once they reach their aims, they're going to get out and leave us with what? So to hear this early on is it's an extraordinary discourse that I worried about, to be honest.
Well, these countries, I mean, Erdogan and the family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region, when they heard the US ambassador in Israel and the Israeli regime say that if the regime takes the whole of the region, it's fine, they should have reacted immediately and broken off ties, because this is the real policy of the United States. This is the unofficial policy of the United States and the collective West. But they are so bound to the West. They're so subordinate to the West that none of them have been able to make a move except for write a letter on a worthless piece of paper condemning the statement. But has the ambassador been punished? Has he been removed? Has he been rebuked? No, because that's the policy. And that's how it is for the entire West. I have no doubt. It is the uh, from the from the um, from the very beginning that they were planning the Greater Israel Project from the Nile to the Euphrates. It's on the flag, and they say it among themselves. But now the U.S. ambassador has said it openly. He said the quiet part out loud. But these regimes, whether Erdogan or these others, or Abdullah or Sisi, none of them have the ability to do anything substantial. Otherwise, you would imagine under these circumstances, after this Holocaust in Gaza, and what we're seeing now in Lebanon, the mass slaughter of innocent civilians taking place in Lebanon now, right now as we speak, and of course in Iran, and the open threats made in the Hebrew media, and of course what the U.S. ambassador has said, and the lack of criticism coming from the White House. This should be this should cause Turkey to cut off oil, to mobilize their resources to stand up against the Israeli regime. The same is true with Jordan, Egypt, all the countries of the region right now should be mobilizing and working together. But no, we see them all cooperating with the US Israeli assault on the Iranian people. All of them, some more, some less, but all of them are cooperating in one form or another. And have no doubt that this is US policy.
Mm.
Just like the two state solution, I've always said for decades, since I was involved in politics, that the two state solution was always a lie. It was always Western governments which spoke of a two state solution. That was their official policy, but their unofficial policy was to allow the Israeli regime to colonize the West Bank, which they've been doing and helping them do it. So the two-state solution was always the official policy, but the one state or the one apartheid regime solution was always the unofficial policy. And today, it is clear as day, based on what the US ambassador has said, that the unofficial policy of the United States is to allow the Israeli regime to go as far as it can. And
Another,
ironically, The country that is least threatened by this expansionism is Iran, because it's the furthest, it's far away. Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, they're all close by. They are the ones who should feel more threatened. Syria, but that's the world that we live in.
Another quick fact check: which ships can pass through the Strait of Hormuz? Initially, we heard Chinese and Russian ships, then we heard just Chinese. Do you have any information on that? As given that you've mentioned that over a dozen ships have been struck by the Iranians trying to traverse without
I
authority through the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, I don't have details, but right now Qatar has halted its gas production. And in fact, some of the countries in the Persian Gulf region have asked the Iranians not to strike their facilities, and they will not produce energy for for 2 months at least. So, uh, there's no oil and gas coming out from the Persian Gulf, at least not in any substantial amount. Anything that does leave has to leave with the consent of the Iranians. And when Trump said he's going to open the Strait of Hormuz, uh, people here ridiculed him because he does not have that capability. The U.S. Navy is stationed very far away out of fear of Iranian missiles. And U.S. jets are stationed very far away from Iran out of fear of Iranian missiles and drones. And I think and that makes, by the way, fighting Iran much more costly. But one other thing that I should point out is that uh, Ayatollah Khamenei he and his military uh, commanders have done an extraordinary job. They devised a way for Iran to be able to defend itself that is unique.
Hmm.
For 25 years, when no one even took drones seriously. It was not a part of the mainstream discourse. They were building drones and missiles with Iranian indigenous technology. And they were building underground bases. And now most of those bases have not been used, by the way. And the most advanced drones and missiles have not been used either. They're leaving that for later. So most of the missiles that they're using some of them are 20 years old, and the drones are old as well. But they have all these underground bases, and one reason why the Americans and the Israelis are bombing cities and and attacking women and children and slaughtering them is because they're frustrated. They can't destroy these underground bases. It's impossible. And so the Iranians keep firing away, whether at assets in the Persian Gulf or in Palestine, and they can do nothing about it. So they get their revenge by killing the innocent and trying to put pressure on Iranian civil society, bombing local police stations, bombing the Red Crescent Society. They destroyed the main building of the Red Crescent Society. They bombed the Center for Emergency Services, uh, the National Center for Emergency Services. They want to, just like during the riots, the Western media, of course, lied about the riots, saying these were peaceful protesters. There was nothing of the sort. But the rioters, the very violent rioters, they were focusing on destroying ambulances and fire engines. And when I think about it now, I believe that they were planning for all that destruction for today, for when the war starts, so that Iran would have a shortage of ambulances and fire engines. And that makes a lot of sense when we see that they bombed the Red Crescent Society, they bombed the uh, National Emergency Services. All of this, it fits. I don't have evidence for this, but I think that was I'm guessing that was all a part of this project. Of course, they were also burning the clinics, but they were also burning ambulances and fire engines because as they were killing people on the streets and as they were burning buildings, they didn't want anyone to put them out. But I think there's probably a connection with what we're seeing today as well.
Mohammed, that tidbit you let us in on about some of these Gulf countries discussing with Iran behind the scenes that they would stop oil and gas production for the next 2 months if Iran didn't touch these facilities, which Iran says it has no interest in doing so, at least not right now.
No. Iran didn't say it has no interest in doing so. Iran hasn't responded.
Okay. Anything you can tell us about, that's not like a national security issue, that you can tell us about these, I'm sure, very ferocious discussions going on behind the scenes between the leaders and representatives of Arab Persian Gulf states and Iran, as they're trying to assuage each other and reassure each other, that this wasn't us, that was us, because Iran's been very clear about its objectives well before the war started, in making this a regional war and getting rid of U.S. bases in this region, which Ali Khamenei promised on January 8th, 2020. So there shouldn't have been any surprises, yet these discussions must be taking place. Are there any problems behind the scene, or are they pretty much understanding what lies ahead and are all going to shut them down? What can you tell us about maybe these kinds of conversations?
What I can say is that some of the governments, this is what I know. I'm not a part of the government and I'm not involved. This is what I've been told. That some of the governments, they've said that they'll halt production for 2 months, which is already what they have to do because they have no way of exporting any of their products anyway at the moment. But they said they'll halt production, and you know that, for example, Qatar has halted its gas production, and but they want Iran not to strike. Iran hasn't responded to this request, and let me be very clear: all of these regimes are complicit. They have blood on their hands. So if Iran is holding back, they should kiss the feet of the Iranian commanders who are holding back, these family dictators. They should be on their knees. But if Iran at some point decides to hit harder, they brought it upon themselves. These American bases were used to murder women and children. And they even fire missiles from Arab territory. I think the United States, I just tweeted something, retweeted the US military fired missiles, and you can tell it's from a desert. It's from these territories.
Ground missile, yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, they are engaging in war against the Iranian people. And this won't be forgotten. And when this war comes to an end, if these regimes still exist, if they exist, which is not clear, I think there's a good chance that they may not exist anymore. And if I was living in any of these countries, I'd take my car and drive through Saudi Arabia and just leave, get out, go to Yemen, go anywhere, but don't stay in the Persian Gulf region. But when the war comes to an end, people like myself will be demanding that these countries pay full compensation for what happened to Iran. In my opinion, the Iranians have to force them to pay for every single murder that has been carried out, for every single building and piece of infrastructure that has been destroyed. And the more that goes on, the more they should pay. In my opinion, these regimes are guilty of murder. They supported Saddam Hussein when he was invading our country, and they've been supporting aggression against us for decades. But this time, they're in trouble, and Iran is doing them a big favor by holding back. But that may not continue. It depends on how the war plays out.
Let us know what you really think, Mohammed. I have to say, let's do like a very, very, I think, important assessment. I agree with you, I think, in what I've been hearing you say. For me, Iran is leading this war. It is in the driver's seat right now, with others flailing to respond. And it was my view that the Americans and Israelis would respond the only way they know how, once they run out of their initial target banks, military target banks in Iran, which is terror and hitting and killing civilians. And civilian infrastructure, which is what we're seeing. But I mean, the way Iran is executing its war aims throughout the Gulf and even Cyprus and elsewhere, and I'm sure there's more to come, suggests it's very much in control. It has a strategy, a very firm strategy, and is executing on its tactics. And this is just the beginning. That's another thing we have to remind viewers is Iran has said it expects and wants potentially a protracted war, in which case they haven't shown remotely all their cards, all their targets, etc. But we have naysayers who think, oh my gosh, how can Iran sustain this? 5 days of constant bombardment, in which you know very well, and many of the people we know who were in Iran during 8 years of constant carpet bombing of Iranian cities by Iraq, which was fully paid for and provided, weapons provided by the Americans and Gulf states, etc. Who do you think is going to, whose pressure points are going to be hit hardest first in either side? Because we're also seeing the ramifications in international markets, right? The Japanese want to sell $600 billion of US ETFs because they need cash. We're seeing economically this play out throughout the world. Do you think the Iranians don't have what it takes to sustain this pressure? Do you think the other side has what it takes to sustain the pressure? Give us your thoughts on this.
I have no doubt that Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Axis of Resistance will deliver a strategic defeat to the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime and any entity that conspires with them, regional in particular. The Iranians have been preparing themselves for decades militarily, ever since the invasion of Iraq. And the Iranian culture is as such that it makes Iranians very steadfast. We have thousands of years of civilization. It's a civilizational state.
Mm.
And on top of that, and even more important, is the fact that as Muslims, and in particular Shia Muslims, the Iranian people and their allies across the region, in Iraq and elsewhere, they have a particular sense of responsibility to resist the aggressor, to resist the oppressor, to support the oppressed. And the Prophet, his son-in-law, and in particular his grandson in Karbala, standing up against the Trump of his era, Yazid, and making the sacrifices that were made, that is deeply embedded in Iranian culture and society. Even Iranians who are not particularly religious, liberals and others, when it comes to the day of Ashura, everyone, almost everyone, gets involved somehow or another. If you come to Iran during the day of Ashura or Tasu'a, you will know that this is not an ordinary day. You will see from the streets and from what's going on the streets anywhere in the country, you'll see that this is a unique day. The Iranian people are a resilient people, and they've been preparing themselves. And there is no chance, in my mind, that the United States will defeat Iran. And as General Soleimani once said, we are the nation of Imam Hussein. And I think that if the Americans had if they had any competent policymakers, they would have done some research on that particular sentence. And maybe that would have caused them to think twice before messing around with the Iranian people and the axis of resistance and this alliance that is still not using its full capabilities by any means, whether in Yemen or Iraq or Lebanon or Iran or anywhere else.
Very important before we finish this interview for me to ask you, Mohammed, what the axis of resistance role will be in as the war drags on. Uh, excuse me. We know that the why are we both coughing? We know that the
Yeah.
we know that the axis of that Hezbollah and Israel, a war is beginning there now. We have seen, to our amazement, that from the earliest times, the Iraqi resistance participated in this war. The Yemenis, we did an interview with an Ansar Allah official yesterday, which is on the Cradle today, has said that we already are at war. When we engage is a different matter. The Kremlin has just said today that Iran has not asked for any help thus far. I don't even think that the Iranians requested among their resistance axes for help. They seem very determined to go it alone, and perhaps not ask for help, not even if the occasion arises. First of all, explain why Iran is so determined to go it alone, and in your view, if the Axis will participate and why it would do so.
This is an alliance, they're not proxies. And they work together, they decide together, and they cooperate together, and they're coordinated, well coordinated. And just as Iranian military capabilities right now are largely hidden from sight, the same is true in Iraq and in Yemen and in Lebanon. If the war escalates, the resistance will escalate. This is an existential fight for everyone. Either the Israeli regime and the United States gains control of West Asia, or the axis of resistance beats them back, because there's no one else who has the honor and dignity in this region to stand up to the West, meaning these regimes and governments. So the axis of resistance collectively recognize how important this moment is in history. And this is an important moment in global history. If the United States succeeds, which it will not, its hegemony will expand across the world much more easily, because the Persian Gulf region is the most important and sensitive part of the world. That's where all the energy comes from. 20 to 25% of world oil comes from this area, West Asia and the Caucasus. That's gone, or if that's controlled by the United States, then everyone has to recognize an enhanced empire. And that is bad news for Africa, for Asia, for Latin America. We've seen what's happened in Venezuela. So Iran and the axis of resistance recognize that this is a fight for survival, an existential fight. They're fighting on behalf of the people of this region, but also on behalf of humanity and the global majority.
Dr. Mohammad Marandi, thank you for those motivational words and the hope. And we will, of course, love to have you back as things develop in the next weeks and potentially months. So thank you again very much for joining us at Rock the Cradle today.
Thank you for inviting me.
West Asia is always on the map, but rarely in its own voice. This region has been narrated by others for far too long. That's why the Cradle exists, to report from the region, not to speak over it.
Together, the United States
to tell stories with depth, precision, and no editorial leash. Because West Asia is more than just a theater of war. It's the corridor between continents, the energy artery of the world, the cradle of civilization. We don't take government orders. We don't serve corporate boards. We serve clarity, rarity, and rawness, no matter the risk. So if you believe this region deserves better than spin, support the people doing the legwork. Donate. Keep the cradle independent.